Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the first of our Founder in Focus series. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Daniel Veytsblit, Investment Director at Investible. I'm excited to have Gemma and Valeria join us today, co-founders of WORK180. Investible invested in WORK180 in July 2019. But we've known and kept in touch with Gemma and Valeria since 2017. I'll start by asking Gemma and Valeria a few questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A function on Zoom to submit your questions, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible. If there are any outstanding, we can come back to you after this video conference. So to kick off, some of you may not know a lot about WORK180. Perhaps Gemma or Valeria, you'd like to provide a very quick overview of why you started WORK180 and what your mission is.
Sure thing. I'm happy to kick off. Thank you, Daniel. So WORK180 started after Valeria and I spent about 5 to 10 years working in the tech sector. And in that time, I worked for mainly what I refer to now as these archaic boys club type environments. And then one day I got this amazing job at this software engineering company where my boss was a woman and my boss's boss was a woman. And I thought, wow, you know, this is all what a workplace is supposed to be like. It was truly inclusive, innovative, productive, profitable. Left there for a reason no one ever should, more money, found myself back in a boys club and thought, oh no, what have I done? And so essentially the idea came to create a place where women could go and find employers that were truly committed to supporting them and genuinely wanting them there. And now, you know, close to 6 years on, it's WORK180 has become so much more than that. Our purpose is to empower every woman to choose a workplace where they can thrive. And how we actually go about that is we flip the job process model on its head. Instead of women sending in their CVs and their credentials to employers, we actually screen employers. And so we're looking at things like pay equity, flexible working, paid parental leave. If they meet a minimum benchmark, the employer can join our platform. And so we're really driving change in terms of employers hiring more women into these niche roles and leadership positions, as well as obviously women finding amazing companies to work with.
Excellent. Thank you for that amazing overview. You noted that you've been running for 6 years now. Can you give us a quick summary of your traction and market position today?
Yeah, sure. So V and I bootstrapped the business for the first 3 years, and we raised our first round of capital in early 2018. To date, we've raised about $4.2 million, and we're across Australia. We launched into the UK 2 years ago, and we recently, amongst this global pandemic, chose to launch into the US as well, which is exciting. And in terms of employers that we work with some of the big names like Google, Microsoft, Atlassian, JP Morgan, BHP, as well as smaller organizations as well that care about diversity from early on. We've had a lot of growth, particularly in the last year. So, for example, our job searches have increased 525% from Q1 2019 to Q1 2020. And we actually don't attribute much of that to COVID. We kind of saw the COVID have an impact in terms of candidate growth post that first quarter. So, yeah, we've had some really, really solid traction to date.
Excellent. And you noted the launch in the US, and we're going to get into that in a little bit of detail shortly. But before we do, I think one of the interesting things to note during this COVID-19 period is you guys have run a remote workforce pretty much from day one. Can you give those listening on the call some tips for running and managing a remote workforce and growing a team whilst working 100% remotely?
Sure. I think today's learning for me in terms of working remotely effectively was that you can actually send messages over Zoom when Slack goes down. So I learned that one from Gemma. Tip number one, very topical amidst all of us working remotely. But, you know, I think we could almost have a separate session on this topic alone. And if I could look at just a couple of key tips for growing and managing a remote team is, you know, we make sure that we do video calls as much as possible. So we almost have this, you know, understanding where everyone usually jumps on video, unless, you know, you've got maybe kids running around in the background or something like that, because it's really important to look at how we replicate that human connection that people normally assume you need to be physically in an office to get that. The other key area that we focus on a lot is building those personal connections outside of BAU. So things like using channels in Slack, you know, we've got water cooler channels, pets, plants, kids, you name it, you know, people really bonding over those things, which we all know is really crucial when it comes to working productively together. And, you know, where that comes into play is, I've noticed, I was really impressed where one of our leaders in the business who's fairly new to the company actually told me how she picked up some cues from somebody on a video call that they may not have been quite themselves. And she actually picked up the phone, she spoke to them about it. Turns out everything was fine. They were just having a bit of sleep deprivation with kids. But just the ability to be able to pick up on those cues, I think speaks volumes on the importance of building those connections whilst we're all working remotely. And even if you're, you know, planning on working remotely after COVID. And the other key area that we focus on as well is constantly getting feedback. So, you know, the best thing you could do is ask new starters after a couple of weeks in, you know, what surprised you the most, good and bad? And that will reveal things that you could tweak in your onboarding process and all these other areas and tools that you use that you might get a fresh pair of eyes on. For us, the number one kind of piece of feedback is, I can't believe how connected I feel with a remote team compared to what I felt working in an office previously. And these are people coming from huge organizations that have never worked remote as well. So I think, you know, constantly tweaking, evaluating is the number one thing to focus on if you are looking at growing a remote team. But like I said, there's like a whole other list of things that we can provide advice on as well.
Yeah, you guys have been featured in the AFR and most of the large publications around the country on that topic. So I'm sure we can get into that if people do have questions around remote working. I want to kind of switch back into growth mode, and you noted that you'd launched in the UK previously. What were some of the lessons, I guess, learnt from launching in the UK and some of the actions that you were going to take into account launching in the US going forward? And this is kind of pre-COVID days.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of things which are kind of specific to WORK180, but I think that they can be applied outside of this if you kind of understand the concept. But with WORK180, we obviously pre-screen employers, and so we look at sets of criteria they need to meet. When we launched into the UK, we went with a very similar set of criteria that we had in Australia. So in Australia, we have about 35 questions that employers need to pass and provide data points for. Now, going into a new market when no one knows who you are and saying, give me all your data for these 35 questions, it actually wasn't received. It was like, who are you? Why am I giving you this information? And so we had to remember almost that we're a startup again. And so we stripped it right back. We did kind of 10 of the most important questions. And now that we've built up the brand, built up the trust, we've been able to add more and more criteria into that piece. And so now our criteria in the UK has extended to things like, does the employer measure the Black, Asian, minority, ethnic pay gap, or for targets and leadership? So it's so much more than just a gender piece. The other learning, I think, for the UK as well was, which we've taken into the US, is essentially doing a softer launch before we do something much engaged. So we kind of because we had all this traction in Australia, we thought, oh, this is going to be easy. We just land on the ground. It's going to take off, same as Australia. And we, again, needed to remember we're a startup again in that new market. And so what we've done in the US is we've taken a softer launch approach where we're building up some really, really good customers, but we haven't really gone hard with the PR or anything like that just yet. So we've got this great base. We've already got, you know, Microsoft and Atlassian and some of those key names over there. And then in a few months, once we've got a bit of an audience and got some more brands on, then we'll be hitting it much, much harder.
And I guess pre-COVID-19, you were planning to have sales resources on the ground and a team on the ground, and we can't really travel over there. And I know, Gemma, you were planning to relocate to the US. Can you talk to how the plans changed, and I guess why you've decided to stick with the launch in the US, and why haven't you kind of pulled back and kind of concentrated on your core market, the Australia, and doubled down on the UK where you've already got a sales team on the ground?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it was crazy. As you said, Gemma was going to relocate. I was actually in the US in mid-March, and I got out of there like kind of a bat out of hell real quick just before the borders closed in Australia. So things, you know, changed very quickly for us. But I guess the question for us was around why not launch? Why not do the soft launch? Like Gemma mentioned, we have 3,000 jobs on the platform currently during a time where women really need that support, and we've got the supportive employers on board. So it was a question of, you know, how could we not launch almost, and how can we do it differently? So without the kind of sales force on the ground, we actually struck up a partnership with a media agency who are essentially an extension of our sales team. So we've got a great relationship with them. We've got about 20 industry partners as well. And, you know, a lot more partnerships on the way, where we've actually built a widget with our jobs that can stream jobs directly to their website, where they've already got traffic of, you know, thousands of women coming to their particular website. So there's a lot of things that we realized we could do online. And, you know, also had to be very mindful of the changing priorities for our customers in terms of launching them, you know, setting up strategy calls, and also quickly pivoting into areas that we could support them with if they're, for example, going quiet on the hiring front. So things like sharing our experiences with remote working, running special workshops for them, getting their job ads in order, you know, teaching them all the different things that we've picked up around policy changes globally. So yeah, it's just kind of thinking about what value can we offer both employers and the candidates, and we had plenty to offer that didn't require us to, you know, actually physically be on the ground, which was a good lesson in itself.
Yeah, excellent answer. I encourage all participants, if they'd like, to submit questions through the Q&A, and I'll start going through some of these. Before I go into that, one last question from me. Was the partnership-led strategy always going to be a focus for you in the US, and have you learnt from that now, and is this something you're going to implement or try to implement in the UK, and maybe even in Australia going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have someone called a global partner manager on board at WORK180, and their sole responsibility is actually building out these partnerships, because it is a one-to-many sell then if you can get these really solidified. So we were just surprised around how quickly we were able to get such a strong and high quality partnership happening in the US, which is an extension of our sales team essentially. In the UK, we've had other partnerships that have proven to be very fruitful. So one of which is a women's industry association group called Women in Transport, and the largest number of employers that we actually work with are transport companies in the UK because of those referrals and that network that they've been able to expose us to. So partnerships are very, very much a key part of our strategy, and not from just a sales growth piece, but also in terms of accessing that niche audience of women as well. So women in transport, women in tech, leveraging those groups, as Valeria mentioned, with the streaming the jobs directly to them.
Okay. And you're obviously in an area of the market that's been highly impacted by the coronavirus, being a jobs platform. And you've got two sides of your marketplace. You've got your employers, which on the whole have been laying off staff, unfortunately. And then you've got your employees, a whole lot of whom are looking for new jobs. Can you give the audience a sense of the dynamics that you're seeing from your unique perspective across Australia, the UK, and now a little bit in the US as well?
One trend that I can talk to is the move to for companies to consider what happens beyond COVID, and a lot of them are actually looking at keeping all their staff working remotely, or giving them the opportunity to either come into the office or work remotely. The sentiment that they're seeing from their employees through Pulse kind of surveys is that employees are going to expect a lot more flexibility and remote working. So where that opens up opportunities is for employers to really be able to provide opportunities to people in a market that traditionally they couldn't. So, things like veterans or military spouses whose partners always redeployed around the world. It could be people with disabilities, people living in remote areas. So there's a lot of opportunities in that area where progressive employers are really thinking about, okay, what can we learn from this? Where do we want to go? What do our employees want? And employees are getting almost more, it's kind of like it's going to be expected to be able to have that flexibility from a progressive employer because of, we've proven the case that it can be done even in areas where traditionally people didn't think it was possible.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, so Australia has been relatively strong, I think. The UK has obviously been impacted by COVID a lot more than Oz. But in saying all of this, I think that WORK180, I don't want to say we're lucky, because obviously we worked hard to kind of create this business, but because we're so much more than a job board, it hasn't impacted us as much as what I originally expected it might when I kind of, when all of this started. And actually I'm very, very optimistic now as the weeks go on, which I was quite fearful maybe sort of 4 to 6 weeks ago. We're still seeing a really good propensity of customers renewing their contracts for 12 months or more. Particularly across the tech sector is remaining strong. We work in mining, that's remaining strong, finance. And then obviously with other sectors, travel, even like tertiary education, where in Australia, where a lot of their students come from overseas, that's been impacted. But, we've got that wide industry spread, and it's also about adding value. What WORK180 does is we add value over and above just jobs. So we've been able to maintain those customers.
And do you want to talk to the employee perspective and what you've seen from a candidate registration point of view across the board?
Yeah, I mean, it's gone up, so it's gone up, and they're looking for remote work as like the number one thing. We've had searches increase by
300%. Yeah, for that. And week on week, we're seeing sort of 20-30% increases in terms of registrations and applications and things like that. So, for obvious reasons, I'm sure.
So we've got our first question from the audience. Has your product roadmap changed reactively because of the impacts of COVID and the change in employer focus? And if so, how did you manage this?
I wouldn't say the product roadmap has changed, but we have certainly added services during this time. So for example, we've added more consultancy type of services as well. So those might be workshops and pieces on transitioning to a remote workforce, which WORK180 are very experienced in. It's also, we've got HR teams, they're not so focused on recruitment anymore. So they're focused on building their employer brand or doing those projects they weren't able to do before because they were so busy. So now we're doing other workshops. We've got one called Think Like a Marketer. So training recruiters to think more marketing. So the consultancy has been a big piece. And then I guess the only other thing is just a bigger focus on the remote working from a jobs perspective, making sure our employers are getting in their jobs into remote working filters and things like that. But so it hasn't changed it dramatically, no.
Okay, and we know that a lot of companies in the tech sector are focusing more on product, whilst kind of, you know, paring back costs around sales and marketing. I guess firstly, have you done that? And secondly, if you have, can you shed some light as to some of the products that you are working on and that we're likely to see from WORK180 in the near term?
Yeah, sure. So we've done some really exciting things from a product perspective lately, and also we do see this as an opportune time to really double down on the product development piece as well. So that post this, we're really ready to scale back up really quickly. So one thing that we've done, which is really exciting, is around our data capabilities. So we're tracking, so it's not, when a job seeker comes to the site, it's not just about looking at what jobs they're interested in and what roles they're interested in or their seniority level. It's also about tracking what policies and benefits and values they're interested in. So we're looking at, you know, we can see a particular person's interested in paid parental leave or flexible working. And this is data that companies have never had before, and they're really, really excited by it. And the reason why is because employers spend a lot of money on employer branding. So when they know actually what their job seeker demographic is interested in, they know where to invest these dollars, and they spend a lot of money in those areas. So we're giving them really informed decision-making tools, essentially. The other product innovation is around the screening of job ads. So we've got Job Ad 180, which tells us if the job ads are more masculine coded or more feminine coded, and then the conversion rates for those. So we know that feminine coded job ads convert better. And obviously, particularly on the WORK180 platform where our audience is women. So giving them that information to improve job ads and such is another big piece. And there's lots of things coming up on the roadmap. The one that I will talk about, because I don't want to talk about too much into the future because we've got some pretty cool stuff happening. But one thing that's going to be out very soon is the ability to actually compare side-by-side employers. So as a job seeker, I can select Google, Atlassian, Microsoft, and then see what benefits they have in line, what they have and what they don't have. So I can make it's like the I select of employers, essentially.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing that on the site. A couple of questions from the audience. How, if at all, do you work with recruitment agencies?
We don't really, and the reason for that is because we're all about transparency. So it's very hard to be able to work with a recruiter when we don't know, kind of, you know, when we can't make the policies of the company transparent. So if you go on the site at the moment, you can see in black and white, you know, about 35 different things about VHP, for example, from the engagement rates through to their paid parental leave, through to their coaching opportunities, breastfeeding rooms. So there's a lot of data, which makes it a bit tricky to be able to engage with recruiters.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question from the audience. You mentioned that the business was bootstrapped for the first 3 years. When or what happened to make you look for investment? And then as a follow-up, how has this changed your business model in terms of reporting, managing stakeholder engagement, i.e. your time and workload?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we bootstrapped for the first 3 years, not necessarily by choice, because I think, you know, when we first came up with this idea, we took it out to investors, and actually within very quickly, we did get an offer of $1 million. However, the conditions of that offer were that it wasn't just, the platform wasn't just for women, and we didn't pre-screen companies. And I was like, maybe you should go buy some Seek shares or whatever, because that sounds like it's been done before. But so we did have to bootstrap, and we bootstrapped to 11 people, and obviously, you know, we're profitable and it was going really, really well. However, Valeria and I, you know, had really big global ambitions, and we saw that we had the opportunity to really make an impact for women and for employers on a much, much larger scale. And to take it internationally, we wanted to raise capital. And so I did the StartMate Accelerator program. And within that 3 months of StartMate, and it was one of the best times of my life. Like I loved it so much. And we launched into the UK, and we raised $1 million in capital, and yeah, went to the UK first. But it was, yeah, it was really just the global ambitions, instead of being, I guess, kind of like the lifestyle business, as they say.
Yeah, that makes sense. Back to a question on kind of the current environment. You're obviously a marketplace, and how are you managing marketing to the many people who are currently seeking roles versus the lack of open roles currently available in the market? And do you have that kind of marketplace imbalance specifically on WORK180?
We haven't noticed as a dramatic drop in jobs as I think other job boards would, because given the sectors that are most popular on the website are tech, banking, finance, and mining. So as Gemma mentioned earlier, those companies are still hiring in their majority, and so we have a lot of senior leaders looking for roles on the platform. So I feel like it's kind of remained around the topics that job seekers do want to hear about. We have changed our tactics slightly around things like, managing working from home at the moment, and all the other areas that job seekers would be interested in versus the marketing that we might have had pre-COVID. We also have what's called a feedback loop feature, which has seen an uptake of, I think there's 16% this week of people actually opting in to provide feedback on the recruitment process with our endorsed employers. So these are very serious job seekers. They jump on the website, they want to stay in touch, they want to rate the company on their recruitment process, which we then feed back through to the employers. So they are improving. I think the kind of rating went up from 2.6 stars to 3 stars out of 5. And that means that employers are really taking that feedback on board, because ultimately it's still very difficult to find women in tech for those organizations, if I take that as one example. So they're doing everything they can, from looking at how their job ads are coded through to what opportunities they can provide to support people that have been displaced. So some of our customers have been able to onboard, I know Woolworths is a great example, that are helping the Qantas staff who've been displaced as well. So I hope that answers the question around how we've kind of pivoted. We've pivoted in the topic space, but otherwise things are pretty kind of, in terms of the volumes, are very similar, I'd say, in those sectors that are still thriving, especially, when we look at the likes of logistics companies. We've had a few of those come on board. We're running a Women in Logistics campaign to celebrate the women, because that's a non-traditional industry that we don't often talk about, all the amazing women working in there. So and that's been our kind of marketing tactic from day one, around celebrating and inspiring companies to do better, and celebrating the women that are working in that market.
Excellent. Well, I'm just looking at the time and noticing we've gone just a bit over our half an hour allotment. I've noticed that there is one final question in the Q&A, which I might end with, and then we can wrap up. So in building your marketplace, what side did you first focus on to build the brand? The employees, or those, I think I should say the employers, or those looking for work?
So when we started, we focused on employers coming to the platform, because, naive, first time business starters, we were kind of thinking this amazing product, they're just going to come flooding through the doors and everybody's going to know who we are. So we went out, you know, first of all to get employers on, and we actually made a sale. We started getting sales very, very quickly, which was great. But then we were like, okay, so we're actually not meeting the demand of what people are paying for, you know, within the first few months. And then obviously had to shift the focus to getting candidates. But, you know, it's a chicken and egg situation. To get candidates to the platform, you need employers on there for them to come and find value. So I don't know if I would change the order, because I feel it'll be very hard to deliver that value if we did candidate first without anything there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does indeed. Excellent. Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, Gemma and Valeria, for your insights. For those in the audience, feel free, if you have any follow-up questions, to email me and I can pass them on to Gemma and Valeria. But thank you for joining us in this first Founder in Focus webinar, and we hope to see all of you soon again shortly. Thanks.